If you are earning £100,000 a year in this country right now, there's a good chance you are taking home less than £5,500 a month, once tax and any student loan repayments come out. And on every pound you earn above that £100,000 line, up to £125,140, the tax office is quietly taking 60 pence of it. Not 40, 60. That's not a typo. It's a mechanism most people never get shown on a payslip. You've done the things you were told to do. You worked the long hours. You took the promotions. And you still feel cash poor by the 20th of the month. The standard advice is to spend less, cut the coffees, tighten the budget. But when you actually run the numbers, spending isn't the problem. The tax system is built to take the most from you in exactly the years you're trying to save the hardest. For anyone between 55 and 65, this matters more than it used to. This squeeze on higher earners is quietly pulling thousands of pounds a year away from money that should be building your bridge to retirement. Leave it unaddressed, and you may find yourself working past the new state pension age of 67, not because you didn't earn enough, but because the money you earned never had a chance to work for you. I've watched this happen to people who, on paper, look like they're doing fine. If you recognize that feeling of earning well but somehow never getting ahead, you're in the right place. Subscribe to Arthur's UK Retirement Guide because we go through exactly this kind of squeeze every week. In the next part, I want to show you the mechanism behind that 60 pence. It has a name, and once you see how it works, you'll understand why spending less was never going to fix it. Here's the mechanism. Between £100,000 and £125,140 of income, you don't just pay the normal 40% higher rate. You also lose £1 of your tax-free personal allowance for every £2 you earn above £100,000. Add those two together, and you're paying an effective rate of 60% on that slice of income. Not 40%, it's 60%. It sounds like a technicality. It isn't. It's the single biggest reason a £110,000 salary can feel smaller than it looks on paper. Picture someone on £110,000. They're £10,000 into that band. HMRC strips away £5,000 of their personal allowance, so £5,000 that used to be tax-free now gets taxed at 40%, which is £2,000. Then the original £10,000 itself is taxed at 40% too, another £4,000. Add it up and £6,000 of that £10,000 has gone straight to HMRC. That's 60% of it gone before it ever reaches a bank account. Most people assume earning more always leaves you better off. In this band it barely does. And here's the part that catches people out at 55 and older. Every pound lost in that trap is a pound that never made it into an ISA or a pension, which means it's a pound that was never going to compound for the next 10 years. Losing £6,000 once feels bad enough. Losing it every year for a decade, at the exact stage of life when you have the most spare income you'll ever have, can genuinely push your retirement back 3 or 4 years. Think about what that band actually costs you, next to something you already know the price of. A £6,000 hit is close to what many people now pay across a full year of mortgage payments, or 2 years of a typical council tax bill. That's the size of the hole this creates, every single year you sit in that band without doing anything about it. Now stack the personal allowance itself on top of this. It's been frozen at £12,570 for years, and the full new state pension has now climbed to £12,547 a year. That's a gap of only £23. If you take even a modest private pension or a bit of part-time income on top of your state pension later on, almost all of it becomes taxable straight away, because the tax-free cushion you were counting on has all but disappeared. But maybe none of this applies to you directly. Maybe you've already stepped back from full-time work, or you're living on savings rather than a salary. The advice everyone repeats, sacrifice more into your pension through work, is useless if you don't have a wage to sacrifice from. What almost nobody explains is that there's a completely different set of rules for people in exactly that position, and used properly, they can be worth more, pound for pound, than anything a high earner gets. Now consider the other side of the system, the side that matters most in the run-up to, when you actually stop earning. Say you're planning to retire in the next year or two, maybe you've already gone part-time or you're winding down a business. While you still have earned income coming in, even a modest amount, carry forward lets you use unused pension allowance from the last 3 tax years up to £60,000 a year each. Think of it as mopping up years you underpaid into a pension while a mortgage or school fees came first. That's a genuinely large amount of headroom if you were under-contributing earlier in life. The catch that trips people up is timing. Carry forward only works while you still have earnings to set it against that tax year. The moment your earned income drops to zero, so does that £60,000 style headroom. Once you've fully stopped earning, a different limit takes over. Without earned income, tax relief on your own pension contributions is capped at £3,600 gross a year, no matter how much unused allowance you built up in previous years. That's still worth having, but it means the real move is making your biggest carry-forward contributions in your last working year or two, not waiting until after you've stopped. That's where the other 2 tools take over for the years with genuinely no earned income at all. If your husband or wife has little or no income of their own, you can put £2,880 into a pension in their name, and HMRC adds £720 on top automatically, taking it to £3,600. That's not a return you're hoping for from the stock market. That's guaranteed the moment the contribution lands, before a single penny gets invested anywhere. And if your other income is low, the first £5,000 of savings interest can come to you completely free of tax, on top of the standard personal savings allowance. I used to assume you needed a big salary for pension tax relief to matter. I was wrong about that. I've seen retirees living on £15,000 a year end up with more free government money in their pocket than professionals earning £80,000 simply because they timed their carry-forward correctly and then kept using the £3,600 non-earner allowance every year after, while the higher earner never got around to using either. Let's do the maths on just the spousal move. Someone with no earned income puts in £2,880. HMRC tops it up to £3,600. That's a 25% return before the money has even touched an investment. Try finding that anywhere else with your capital this safe. Here's the trade-off most people miss. Leaving that same cash sitting in an ordinary savings account, it earns interest, and eventually that interest gets taxed, and it just sits there doing nothing extra for you. Cycle the same money through a pension instead, and you get a guaranteed uplift on day one, plus whatever growth follows after that. The cash doesn't disappear. It just stops being idle. None of this requires anything complicated. You don't need a company scheme or an employer's payroll department. A SIP you open and fund yourself works exactly the same way, whether you're 58 and still doing a bit of consulting, or 63 and living entirely on savings and a small pension already in payment. What changes is which of these 3 tools is actually available to you that year. So what happens if most of what you've built isn't sitting in a savings account at all, but in the walls of your house? Now think about where most of the wealth actually sits for people your age. A huge number of homeowners in their 60s have £400,000 or more sitting in the value of their house, and less than £20,000 sitting anywhere they could actually spend it tomorrow. On paper, that looks like real wealth. In practice, it behaves nothing like it. The Pensions and Lifetime Savings Association puts the moderate standard of living for a single retired person at £31,300 a year, enough for a car and a 2-week holiday in Europe, without much left over for the unexpected. That figure matters here because bricks and mortar can't pay for any of it. You can't post a brick to the electric company. If your money is trapped in the house, it isn't funding your moderate retirement. It's just sitting there, looking reassuring on paper. Anyone who lived through 2008 already knows the other risk. Property is only worth what someone else is willing and able to pay for it at the moment you need to sell. In a slow market, the people with no cash reserves are the ones forced to sell at the worst possible time, or not sell at all. Think about what actually forces people to dip into cash in an ordinary year. A boiler that fails in January. A car that needs replacing before its MOT. None of that waits for a good time to sell a house. Without a liquid cushion, those ordinary costs end up on a credit card. Or worse, force an early and badly timed pension withdrawal. This is why building what I'd call a liquid fortress matters. Money sitting inside an ISA, ready to move the moment you need it. Not locked into an asset that takes months to turn into cash. Right now, the full £20,000 ISA allowance can still go entirely into a cash ISA if that's what suits you. From the 6th of April 2027, that changes. Anyone under 65 will only be able to put £12,000 of that allowance into cash, with the rest needing to go into stocks and shares to get the full £20,000 sheltered. The 2026 to 2027 tax year is the last one where you can put the whole allowance into cash, if that's the right call for your circumstances. If you don't have that liquid bridge in place, the rise in the state pension age to 67 stops being an abstract policy change and starts being a real gap in your income, with nothing built to fill it. Let's stress test this with someone real. Picture someone age 62 right now who spent years planning to retire at 66. That was always their number. Under the current rules, the state pension age is moving from 66 to 67, and for someone their age, that shift lands directly on their plan, pushing their actual pension age to 67. That's not a small change. The full new state pension is £241.30 a week, which comes to £12,547 a year. A 12-month gap between stopping work and that pension actually landing is a £12,547 hole sitting right in the middle of their plan. Someone without a plan for that gap has one option left: draw down the private pension a year earlier than intended. That sounds harmless until you notice what it actually does. Money taken out in the first year or two of retirement doesn't get the chance to grow, and pulling it out early, especially in a weak market year, can permanently reduce how much is left for the following 20 or 30 years. This is a well-known risk in retirement planning, often called sequence risk, and it's one of the reasons an early, unplanned withdrawal can end up costing someone as much as 20% of their total lifetime pot, simply because of when the money came out, not how much. Now picture the same person, but with a different history. A few years earlier, while they were still earning well, they built up an ISA specifically to cover a gap like this. When the state pension age moved and their plan needed to stretch an extra year, they didn't touch the pension at all. They drew from the ISA instead, let the pension keep growing untouched, and let the state pension catch up on schedule. Same shock, same 12-month gap. Completely different outcome because one of them had already built the bridge and the other hadn't. It's worth sitting with that for a second. Nobody plans to retire in the wrong year of the market. But the calendar doesn't ask permission, and neither does a change in state pension age that was announced years after most people set their original plan. This is not about predicting the market. It's about making sure a single administrative change, the kind that happens through a policy announcement rather than a stock market crash, cannot quietly cost you a year of comfortable retirement. So what do you actually do with all this? Not a full budget overhaul. A few specific moves timed around the mechanisms we've just walked through. If you're earning over £100,000, look at whether salary sacrifice can bring your taxable income down toward £99,999. That single move keeps your full personal allowance intact, worth up to £6,000 a year compared with sitting inside that 60% band. You're not spending the money. You're redirecting it before HMRC gets the chance to apply that rate to it. Next, use the ISA bridge properly. The £20,000 annual allowance is still fully available now, and every year you don't use some or all of it is a year of tax-free growth you don't get back later. Given the cash ISA change landing in April 2027, this is worth reviewing properly before that date, rather than leaving it for the last week of the tax year. Then work out one number, what I'd call your gap number. Take the income you actually want each year, subtract whatever your state pension will pay, and multiply the difference by the number of years between when you plan to stop working and when you turn 67. That single figure tells you exactly how much your ISA or other liquid savings need to cover, rather than guessing. I spoke to a viewer, David, 59, who told me he felt like he was struggling on £90,000 a year. When we went through his numbers together, he was paying around £3,000 a year in higher rate tax that a simple pension contribution would have avoided entirely. Once he made that change, he hadn't lost that £3,000. He'd just moved it from HMRC's pocket into the pocket of his 67-year-old self. None of these three moves require a financial windfall or a change in how much you earn. They require noticing where the money is currently leaking and redirecting it before the tax year closes it off. But here's the honest part. Knowing these three moves and actually making them are two different things. Most people who hear this nod along and do nothing for another 6 months. So why does that happen? It isn't laziness. It's something closer to instinct. The same instinct that makes £2,000 a month feel like too much to give up, even when you already know where that £2,000 is going instead. Naming it as instinct instead of failure is often the first step that actually makes the moves above easier to start. There's a name for that instinct: loss aversion. Losing £2,000 out of this month's pay feels sharper and more immediate than gaining a comfortable retirement 15 years from now, even though the second one matters far more. If you feel poor on £100,000 a year with a mortgage, a car, and maybe kids still at home, that's not a personal failing. It's what happens in what I'd call the maximum squeeze years, the stretch where your costs and your earning potential peak at exactly the same time. You're not behind. You're in the hardest stretch, and it passes. So don't try to redirect £2,000 a month all at once. That's how most plans die in week one. Start with what I'd call the tax-neutral amount, the money you were going to lose to HMRC through that 60% band anyway. Redirecting that first doesn't feel like saving. It feels closer to free, because you were never going to keep it either way. Once that feels normal, and it usually only takes a couple of pay cycles, the next amount gets easier to move. That's the whole shift, not willpower. Just starting with the money that was never really yours to spend. None of this started with a spending problem. You're not struggling because of takeaway coffees or a subscription you forgot to cancel. You're struggling because the tax system takes the most from you in exactly the years you have the most capacity to save, right when you can least afford to lose it. Use that 60% band as a signal, not a punishment. Build the ISA bridge before the cash ISA rules change in April 2027. Work out your one gap number so a year you didn't plan for doesn't quietly cost you 20% of everything you've built. If you want to stop feeling like you're just funding HMRC and start being someone with real options at 67, subscribe. We'll keep walking through these changes together as the 2026 to 2027 tax year unfolds. Retirement isn't one big decision made at the end. It's a series of smaller tax choices made a few years before you actually need them. Most of the people who end up comfortable at 67 didn't earn dramatically more than everyone else. They just stopped losing money to a system they never fully understood a few years earlier than everyone else did. That's the whole difference between 67 feeling like a deadline and 67 feeling like a choice.